And moving to South America, the long-simmering diplomatic feud between Ecuador and Mexico is escalating. Ecuador has officially filed a complaint against Mexico at the International Court of Justice. Quito says Mexico illegally granted political asylum to former Ecuadorian Vice President Jorge Glas, a move that led to Ecuador's raid on the Mexican embassy earlier this month.
The decision of the President of the Republic was taken in the face of a real risk of imminent escape of the citizen required by justice in the exercise of our sovereignty.
Now, the Mexican government has questioned why Ecuador waited for weeks to file its lawsuit. The latest escalation comes as the World Court begins hearing a separate case brought earlier by Mexico against Ecuador. Now, Mexico has accused Quito of violating international laws by storming its embassy.
The purpose is to judge and declare that Ecuador is responsible for the damage that violations of its international obligations have caused and continue to cause to Mexico. Second, the suspension of Ecuador as a member of the United States until it issues a public apology acknowledging the violations of the fundamental principles and norms of the international law.
On April 5th, the Ecuadorian police raided Mexico's embassy to arrest former Vice President Glas, who had been convicted of corruption. He'd been sheltering in the embassy since December of last year, claiming he was being politically persecuted. But Ecuador claimed Glas' stay at the Mexican embassy was in fact unlawful. His arrest came hours after Mexico offered him political asylum and warned Ecuador against any intervention in the process. Now, following Glas' arrest, Mexico suspended diplomatic relations with Ecuador.
Mexico announces the immediate suspension of diplomatic relations with Ecuador. In this sense, Mexican diplomatic personnel in Ecuador will leave the country immediately. Mexico expects Ecuador to offer the necessary guarantees for the departing Mexican diplomatic personnel. Mexico will appeal to the International Court of Justice to hold Ecuador accountable for violations of international law.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador called the raid a violation of his country's sovereignty. Meanwhile, Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa said his government would not allow any criminal to stay free.
For Ecuador, a criminal cannot be considered a person persecuted for political reasons when he's been convicted with an enforceable sentence and arrest warrant issued by the police authorities.
Now, Noboa's actions were highly criticized by several countries, including the United States, which accused him of violating international law.
We condemn this violation of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, including the use of force against embassy officials. We've reviewed the security camera footage from the Mexican embassy and believe these actions were wrong. The Ecuadorian government disregarded its obligations under international law as a host state to respect the inviolability of diplomatic missions and jeopardized the foundation of basic diplomatic norms and relationships.
The Ecuadorian embassy in Mexico City also faced massive protests, with residents calling the country fascist. Later, a 3-member Ecuadorian tribunal declared the raid illegal, but upheld Glas's imprisonment.
Today, the court has granted habeas corpus to former Vice President Jorge Glas, declaring that his detention was arbitrary and illegal. Unfortunately, he will not be released because he has an accumulation of sentences. And I want to clarify to Ecuador that he has already served more than 60%, and he has not been able to benefit from the pre-release.
Now the regional spat has reached the international court. And the question is, will Ecuador face suspension from the United Nations, or will Mexico face action for allegedly interfering in Quito's internal affairs? From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.